Hi, last week we introduced the idea of how a power plant works, and we came up with a concept that when we have a plant, we have a bunch of different components, and they all provide resources to each other. And those resources typically are fluids, and usually they contain energy. So we transfer energy around using fluids from component to component. And so we came up with the goals that we were going to work towards last week, which is that we wanted to understand a bunch of these different systems in the plant and figure out what resources they require and what they provide. And so we're going to continue with that in order to try to kind of understand what that spidered web arrangement of resource sharing within the plant looks like. And eventually we hope that we're going to be able to start the boiler, which is one of our goals for next semester. Okay, so last week we looked at the air compressors and we realized that the air compressors would provide us with compressed air. But in order to do that, we needed a bunch of things. And so we explored a number of systems that provided the resources to our air compressors in order to provide compressed air. Well, we build off of that this week. So one of the things that we're going to use our compressed air for is starting up our diesel generator. So we need that compressed air in order to turn over the engine in order to be able to start it. But that's not all the resources that we need. So the diesel generators has a number of systems and they're going to all need some resources in order for this thing to run and run reliably. So if we're missing resources, we may have the problem that it doesn't start at all. Or else the other issue that we may have is that it runs and it runs for a little while, then it stops. Okay. Or else we may have even another issue, which is that it runs for a while and then we have some alarms and other problems that start developing after it has been running. So we want to avoid all those things. One of the resources that we're going to need in order for our generator to run is fuel. Okay, and so we'll go to our fuel oil service tanks when I do my walkthrough, and we'll find our fuel that can be supplied to the diesel generator. We also are going to need cooling water, and so we'll supply our cooling water from our seawater system, which we've already used previously to help with the cooling of the air compressors. And so we'll have cooling water coming from our seawater system. And in addition, we'll have a few other systems that we're going to tackle. Those two are the major ones, but we do have a few that we need to also look at internally within that diesel generator. Okay, so we have our diesel generator number one that is our goal to start up this week. Now, in order to know if we've started it up, we better look at some data and know how do we know this thing is running or not. So first of all, what we have is we have our engine control box down here. Okay, so the panel that would be next to the engine, and we have a few things. We have a start button on it and a stop button, and we also have an indication here, is it running? It is not running, so I don't have my little green light that's showing, but there's some other ways that I can tell if it's running or not, and one of them is to look at this N value here, and if I look at what N is, it is my diesel generator speed. Right now it's at 0 RPM. So it is not running RPM rotations per minute. If I look at this data box here, what I have is a set of data on this generator, and we can see by looking at this line here, my engine speed is typically around 900 RPM. So that's its rated speed. So we would expect when this thing is running that it runs around 900 RPM. Okay, so in order to get it running, we're going to have to supply it with a number of resources. And one of those resources we created last week. So let's go back to our start air system and take a look. So up here I have my air compressor number one on. It has cooling water that's being supplied to it. And it is in remote, and I'm using my control system to decide when it turns on and off. It's supplying air to my air receiver, and I can see that my air receiver pressure is starting to build. I'm going to use the air that's created in this air receiver to make its way to my diesel generator number 1. Try and dive out of the way here. There we go. And if I come across, I can see that I have some air pressure that's building. Now, you're going to need at least 15 bar of pressure, so I've met the minimums at this point to be able to start this. Okay. So that's one of my systems, and I'm going to go around clockwise through all the different systems, and we'll talk about them and make sure they're up and running. Okay, so next one that I have is this orange system at the bottom. Okay, and this is my lube oil system. Now, a couple things. First of all, I can see that I have an alarm in this system, so a low lube oil level. And I'm going to add lube oil by opening this valve. And we can see that lube oil is flowing in to my sump, and my level is going up. When I reach about 50%, I'm going to close off that valve, and I should have a stable level. If I overfill it, I have a way to drain it. So I could drain out some oil if it's too high, or if it's too low, I can add. We never want to have those open at the same time. Adding oil and draining oil is not a good strategy. From the sump, now that I have oil in it, I'm going to make my way down to 2 pumps. Now, there's a little bit of a difference between these 2 pumps, which is the symbol. When I have my generator and it runs, it's going to drive a number of the pumps automatically. And what I mean by that is we have these pumps here, here, and here, and here, that have a symbol, and what the symbol is describing is a shaft that connects to the pump, and it has a pulley on it, and that pulley is driven by the rotation of the engine. So I can't click on this to turn it on and off. The only way that this pump would turn on is by having the engine turn on. Okay. However, I can run this pump, so I'm going to manually turn this guy on. However, he doesn't allow flow until I've opened up one of my pathways through a filter. So I'll open up, say, my pathway through filter 1, and now we can see we have flow of lube oil. Okay. My next system is going to be my seawater system, and I need to provide it with seawater. So I'm going to backtrack to number 1. And before I do that, I'm just going to take note of where I came from. And where I've come from is page 7.5. So if I scan around on this page, what I'm looking for is my little indicator box that I've come from number 75. And if I scan through my heat exchangers here, I see that I have diesel generator 1 cooler, which is my 7.5. So I'm going to open up this valve. And I'm going to go back to 75 and just validate that, yes, I do have seawater flowing. Okay. I have my freshwater system, so this is my sort of a secondary cooling system that is what I use to circulate water through the engine. And I want to keep it separated from the seawater system because the seawater system may be let's call it dirty or untreated water. And the freshwater system, I want it to be clean and treated water so it's suitable for going through a piece of equipment. So I want to isolate those two, and I do that using the freshwater systems. I have a couple of issues on my freshwater system. One is that it's cold. So in order for me to get this running, what I'd like to do is turn on my preheater. And I'm going to put them into auto. And I have a little electric heater here that is going to turn on, and a little circulation pump, and it's going to start to warm up my coolant. So pre-warm it before I start the electric or the diesel generator. I also noticed that my expansion tank is low. So I'm going to try opening up this valve, However, I see that it's not providing me with any water. So I'm going to backtrack. So I'm going to keep going back to 6.7 and remembering that I just came from 7.5 again, and I'm going to look for where that connection is to the system. And I can see it in this bank, number 7.5. So my diesel generator here is going to need a pathway back to this treated water tank, the Hydrophore tank. And if we go back to 7.5 now, what we can see is that our level is increasing. Again, around 50% would be probably an appropriate target for this. And if I do overfill, I could have a drain. Once again, caution you, don't have the drain and the fill open at the same time. It's counterproductive. Okay, so I'm just watching that, and I'm going to close it now. And if you did overshoot and you're not happy with where the level is, you could always drain it a little bit. But as long as you're within plus or minus 10, no problems there. 40 to 60% is great. Okay. These pumps aren't going to turn on until my diesel generator is running. And I can show you that. If I try to start it, I'm not going to be able to start the engine just yet, but it will at least turn over at this point. And so you can see that these pumps become live as soon as I attempt to start it. Okay, so I tried to start it, and the air pressure is able to turn it to about 400, 450 RPM, but it doesn't make it all the way. What we're missing is fuel. So fuel needs to be added in, and in order to set up my fuel system, I'm going to use my yellow line here, the diesel oil, but I'm going to go all the way from the tank as my starting point. So I'm going to go back to number 5, and again I have that connection to 7.5. Okay, there's a couple of them, so I have a spot 2 diesel generator 1, and I also have a return pathway from diesel generator number 1. So I'm going to supply fuel to my diesel generator number 1. And that brings me here for fuel. And I'm going to continue across. I have a valve to open up and then a bank of filters. So once again, I'll choose one filter. We don't usually want to use both filters. We usually will have a filter as a backup. So we don't have both running at the same time, because if both plug at the same time, then I'm left with no filter available. So whenever we see systems that are in parallel, such as we do here, then we would typically want to use one and keep the other one as a backup. Okay, and so that's typically a pattern that you tend to see in plants. If you have duplicate systems that are running in parallel, generally it's there as a backup. Okay, so I think that I have all of my systems supplied and all of my resources available. So let's give it a try and we'll see if we can get it started. So I'm going to hit my start button here, and I'm going to make sure that I am in local control. And previously we saw that the speed was capped around 400 or 450, but in this case it looks like my engine is running. And it appears that it's running at around 900 RPM, which was our target. So I'm pretty happy with that. I did get an alarm that came up, and that's okay. So it's a low temperature alarm, and that's expected because this machine has just started up and it's really in a cold state. And we can see that my temperature is increasing, so that should hopefully eliminate that low temperature alarm at some point. Okay. Once I am done starting up, I can switch over my lube oil pump to automatic. Okay, and he will decide automatically to turn on or off as needed. Okay, so at this point, we've started up our diesel generator. It's running, and it's going to continue to run. Okay. We want to just monitor it for a bit. We may get a few more alarms. So we have a low temperature alarm that came up. Again, the same issue that our system is cold and it's in the process of warming up, and that one will disappear. What we want to make sure is that we don't have high temperatures that exist, which means maybe we're lack of cooling water or we've run out of cooling water. Those could be all symptoms that exist. So really at this point, we would just have these two low-level alarms, and we would want to make sure that all of our systems are stable. Okay, and that would be a measure of success for us in starting up this generator.